Do you remember the first time that you were in a forest? For some people, I hear that it was a frightening experience. And if you live next to a place that was full of animals that would eat you, I can understand why. But I grew up in Denmark, and for me, the forest was a safe place. It was a magical place. My little playground, and I could play there for hours. But one day, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I saw a lumberjack with a chainsaw. Just a small little incident, but seeing him cutting down trees made a big impression on me. And when I asked my mom why he was doing it, the answer I got was just disturbing. And so at that point in time, I knew that I wanted to do something to protect forests and protect the animals in them. But then came the teenage years, and with that came the testosterone. And so I needed to prove myself and go out there to the world, and I became an accountant. I know what you're saying. Accountants, they're not really the superhumans of the world. They don't have the Herculean build, but it got me into finance, the financial industry, and I proved myself. And I'm very happy where I am today. But deep down, I've always had this longing for trying to get back to that core when I was 8 to 9 years old. And for me, the way in there came through sustainability reporting. Reporting on the impact of a company has. But I realized at that point in time that the issue went deeper. I was not really getting to the point that I wanted to. And to do that, I needed to be able to actually quantify the impact of the company. In short, I needed to measure the externalities. So in simple terms, what I'm talking about here is, if I told you that the company that you were working for made $1 billion of profit last year, how would you feel? You probably think that's a pretty good company. It's creating products for the rest of the world. But what if I'm telling you now that in the process of doing that, that company was responsible for polluting the airs, cutting down trees, employing child labor in the supply chain, and that cost the society up to $2 billion. Would you think differently? Would you want to work there? Would you want to put your savings there? I think you might think differently about it. And in fact, there was a study done a few years ago that suggested that 20 of the biggest industries around the world have just that impact. The negative impact that they're not paying for the world far exceeds the profit that it is making, the value of their products. And this is to the tune of $5 trillion, the same as the GDP for Japan every year. So what do we need to do about it? As an accountant, can we make a difference? I believe we can. So your question is going to be, can it be done? And what can an accountant do? Yes, it can be done, and it should be done. In fact, I'm not the first one saying this. People have been writing books about this back to the 1960s. It's called impact measurement, pricing externalities, purpose-driven companies, stakeholder capitalism. It has many names, but the point is often the same. And so if you think about accounting back then, it might be daunting to put numbers on these things, but accounting was invented in the 1920s, and back there, we were just happy to be able to balance a book, they tell me. I wasn't born in 1920. But today, we can put numbers to all kinds of things. We can fair value exotic derivative and financial instruments that didn't even exist back then. We can put numbers on lawsuits that even a bookies wouldn't put odds on, kind of. So we've come a long ways in 1920s, and we now have to take the same path, but we have to measure and report on the things that really matters to the world that we live in. Now, why do we have to do this? We have to do this because if we don't do this, it is simply too easy to avoid the uncomfortable conversations. So then the second question, what can I do as an accountant? Well, before I came here, I did a little unscientific study, and I asked people, what are the first words that comes into your mind when you think about an accountant? And you're not going to like the answer if you're an accountant. It were things like neat, conscientious, and a little bit boring. But also what they said was trustworthy. And I looked that up. And in fact, our industry as accountants is one of the most trusted in the entire world. And we have the ability to put numbers of things that other people cannot. Sure, it's hard to put numbers on human lives. It's hard to put numbers on the value of the forest and all the animals in it. But we do that every day. We do that when we make public budgets. When you buy an insurance contract, implicitly there's a number to human lives. And we need to do that because we don't have all the resources in the world. And we as accountants can do this. So what I'm calling for here today is essentially for all of us to do something individually and together. Individually, what can you do? Well, whenever you're in a meeting with senior management, if you can find a way to show the impact, or just ask the question, what's the impact of this product that we're doing? Do we know what the impact is of the company that we all work for? You're starting a conversation. There are methodologies to help us do these things. They exist. When you're at a new product about to be launched, you ask the question, what's the impact of this product? When you're dealing with signing that first supply chain contract with one of your suppliers, you ask, do we know anything about this supplier? Do we know the practices that they have? These are all things we can do. The second thing we can do is together. We can come together and we can call for actions. We can ask as a group of people, why is this thing not happening in the universities? Have you ever been to a course on impact measurement? I doubt it. If you work in a public accounting firm, have anybody ever offered you to think about the impact? No, they put in credits. And then you might think, what is this thing that we call it? Well, I'd like to call it Accounting Matters, because I really believe that together as a group of accountants, we can bring about that conversation that is so difficult to have, but need to be had, is we fundamentally are to change the companies that we work for. I sometimes think back about that lumberjack that I met when I was 8 or 9 years ago. And I wonder if he knew that the company he was working for, if he knew the impact that they were making, would he have made a different decision? Would the company have made a different decision? Maybe. I like to think that they would have. I like to think that they could have. And so, thank you very much.